Welcome to Breaking with Tradition, a new Catalyst podcast where we follow in the footsteps of our founder, Felice Schwartz, and sit down with change-making leaders and professionals accelerating diversity, equity, and inclusion in today's global workplace.
Founded in 1962, Catalyst drives change with unparalleled thought leadership, actionable solutions, and a galvanized community of multinational corporations to accelerate and advance women into leadership. Because progress for women is progress for everyone. We're your hosts. My name is Lucy Cullen.
I'm Victoria Kuketz.
And I'm Erin Souza Resendiz. And we're three Catalystas that live in different regions around the globe. We're united by one goal: to create workplaces where anyone can thrive.
Hi, I'm your host, Victoria Kuketz, and today we're here with two brilliant leaders consulting at the forefront of AI. I'm chatting with Terry Stone, Managing Partner of the Americas at Oliver Wyman, and Ana Kreacic, CEO and Chief Knowledge Officer, also at Oliver Wyman. These two leaders are quite prolific, and their organizations are releasing new reports advising the global workforce as AI continues to develop. For the purposes of our conversation today, we'll focus on Terry and Ana's recent article for the World Economic Forum titled "Women Are Falling Behind on Generative AI in the Workplace, and Here's How to Change That," which offers a look at the effects on all women's jobs, but really something called pink-collar jobs. So today we'll explore the opportunities and pitfalls, the clear calls to action, and wade through the ambiguities. So first, I want to welcome our guests, Terry and Ana. It's so great to have you here. Thank you for joining. And I'd love to have you both tell us a little bit about yourselves. What do you do for Oliver Wyman, and what excites you about being an AI practitioner?
I have kind of two split jobs, but I see them as two sides of the same coin. One is leading our global research and knowledge teams, and two, really on a day-to-day basis, running our think tank, the Oliver Wyman Forum, which is our platform for convening public and private sector leaders across the board and actually creating progress on a number of difficult issues. And AI is certainly an exciting one, but also not an easy one. So for me, the excitement is just the opportunity for positive change. You know, I kind of came to in college when the internet came about and spent a lot of time in the tech sector and the telco sector after that. So I think we're at a very exciting time, but I think it's a time that requires a lot of reflection if we're going to get it right.
I also, in this case, have two jobs, I suppose you could say. I'm the managing partner who leads our global healthcare team at Oliver Wyman. So it's one of the consulting practices we have. And over the last few months, I've also been asked to take on the executive sponsor role leading what I would call the transformation of Oliver Wyman's own business model with regard to AI. So we're out there actually advising clients all the time about how their businesses need to adapt and change. And in addition to doing that for my healthcare clients, I've been asked to take it on behalf of our own firm itself. And so when you ask me about what gets me excited or what am I looking forward to, I'm actually older than Ana. So I was actually in the workforce when the internet came to be. And I think this is probably, AI is going to be the single biggest disruptive force or catalyst for change in business in my entire career. I think the internet, or the rise of the internet and connectivity, created improvements in things that we see today, like you can work more remotely. People are able to connect and collaborate when they're not in the same room in a way they couldn't when I first started my career. But I think with AI, what we're now finding is AI can do things like parts of our jobs that we used to do. So switching a meeting to being on Zoom versus a meeting being in person, or communicating via email versus a memo or in a meeting, those were incremental changes. This is now on the forefront of really reshaping business. And specifically, you might imagine in management consulting, we're in the business of providing advice, and clients often hire us for our expertise. And so I think it's both exciting, but it's a big challenge in the consulting industry about how do you take advantage of what's possible and avoid your business potentially becoming more commoditized, because it will be easier and easier for clients to tap into expertise in an AI-enabled world.
So, Ana, I'd love to start with you. In the article you both co-authored for the World Economic Forum on Gen AI and women in the workplace, you talk about how men outpace women in Gen AI use across every age group, especially Gen Z. I'm wondering if you can break down the findings a little bit more for us.
Historically, there's always been a technology gap, whether you're talking, in terms of college degrees in STEM or you're talking in specific industries. And so when we looked at use, and we looked at it across in terms of have you ever used, or do you use it at least once a week? There is a gap. 59% of women, 59% of men versus 51% of women use it at least once a week. And there's also a gap on the inverse, right? Like the people that have never tried it or are not using it at all. The number for men is 33%. The number for women is 37%. So we are seeing a gap, and the gap, interestingly enough, is even higher for Gen Z, as you said, which is we were looking at specifically the older Gen Z, so 18 to 24. And there, we go to 71% men and 59% women. And as a woman, I mean, that's pretty worrisome, because we're not only seeing this on usage, we're actually seeing it on all factors of broader awareness, of broader engagement, of, leaning into training, leaning into participation at work or participation at home in leveraging generative AI. And so, I think the gap wasn't a surprise, but seeing it across everything, including just the leaning in, is a little bit of a surprise. And I think, there's a lot that we need to do about it.
Terry, I think that you shared a really interesting data point with me when we had our briefing call, that something like 40% of Gen Z would prefer an AI manager than a person manager. I'm just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your reflections around this article and the reports that you work on, and maybe unpack those data points as well.
I think I'll start first by addressing some of what Ana described as writ large out there. Women are lagging the adoption and use of AI in the everyday versus men. Interestingly, probably not a surprise, as I embarked on our work at Oliver Wyman, I made a point of checking amongst our power users and who's using the tools we've put out there. Were we having a skew? And we actually realized that at Oliver Wyman, we're not actually having a skew. We're about 50-50 on men and women using it. So I wanted to address that for a moment, because I think the truth of the matter is, if people are left to their own devices, to the point Ana mentioned, there are more men who tend to come from a STEM background. They play video games more than women. They may be just more inclined or likely to mess around with and navigate their own way out of curiosity. Whereas a lot of the women have more of the sort of household responsibilities or other things, and their marginal time to sort of try new things at work is lower. So the main thing I think that helped us keep the gap in check was a really intentional effort on the enterprise level to engage everybody in the training. And I think that's one thing we're often advising our clients on. If you proactively bring it to people, they will engage in it. Like, there's a very high correlation in our data, Ana, about the people who say they don't use it are the same people who claim, well, my organization isn't really training us. And you can see it in generational gaps. You can see it in some of the gender gaps. Same people at the same company are experiencing it differently. So this idea of being very intentional, I think, can help your organization avoid having skews like that.
Let's look at this imbalance a little bit more. And what happens if it continues to be unaddressed?
There are probably slightly different definitions of pink collar jobs out there, but probably the most prevalent would be they're jobs that tend to have a high percentage of women in them and tend to be more service industry oriented. Okay, so you're likely teachers, social workers, nurses, florists, the beauty industry, travel. These are all ones where historically there's been a higher intention or a higher percentage of women as the dominant part of the workforce. I think some interesting things we have found about that group is that they are much more likely to have said that their employer, so when asked a question about, has your employer made you comfortable that your job will not be at risk and that AI can enable you to do your job differently? On average, it's about 55 to 75% of workers in many fields feel like that statement is true. So my employer's trying to get me to use it, and they're trying to get me to not come at it from a point of fear in hopes of driving me in. In the pink collar sector, the statistics are much, much lower than that in terms of what percent of them are likely to believe that their employer is not going to replace their job. It's lower in the 40s. And then what we found was, if you took a pink collar category like healthcare or education, interestingly, the gender skew, because not every teacher is a female, not every nurse is a woman, right? But the gender skews that Ana spoke of, they still persist, unfortunately. So one of the challenges that we have there is that on an overall basis, the overall percent of regular adoption in healthcare is about 45%. But amongst the women, it's only 34. And in education, it's like about 52% of people in education are using it regularly. But for women, it's only 39%. And I think we can imagine education is a huge category. It's probably skewed by gender bias in professors at university using it in more advanced ways versus third grade math teachers, in your local elementary school. And so we're still winding up having that divide, even in the same category. And we think it's really important and something that, as we said earlier, is quite addressable.
Do you feel that leaders are aware of the necessity of really avoiding another she session like we saw in the pandemic? Or do you feel like this is squarely a part of the work in your advisory on helping them understand that, part of these ways of managing through disruption is a really kind of systemic anti-bias lens?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there's a bunch of things that we see out there, from ranging from quite impactful and effective to sort of maybe not the best practice. But I would say over the last year, there was so much hype about a year ago. And I feel like a bunch of leaders in business have sort of taken or adopted the if you build it, they will come mindset. So they're not engaging and training enough. And as a result, we've actually seen statistical drop off in the percent of frequent, like I use it every week users, which is crazy because as the technology is getting better and better, the percent of people using it every week has kind of fallen off, which means in the early stages, people jumped in, but they used it for I won't say silly, but things like, where should I go to dinner tonight? And so it never got the traction in really enabling my job, which is unfortunate because when done well, you can see easily 15, 20% productivity improvements in key areas. Or in the business we're in, I was just citing a statistic this morning where a 400% improvement in the productivity for a particular task, something is taking a fraction of the time that it was taking before. So there's huge possibilities, but too often people are still doing, if you build it, they will come. And I think one of the other challenges that people are having is there's still a lot of fixation on AI as it's going to drive efficiency. And I think the best companies are thinking about, how does AI serve as a catalyst for me to reimagine everything we do? How do we add value to our clients? What of the tasks that my thousands of employees do every day are really valuable? And which ones do we do just because we've had no other choice or because it's the way we've always done it? And the companies that are really embracing using AI, not just to AIify or botify everything, but to really step back and think about, what do I do that adds value? How can I reimagine work? They're able to free up or think about possibilities where you're not only getting efficiency, but you're able to serve your clients in such a better way that you get market share gain and revenue growth, which we think is a huge part of it. And a lot of the focus has been on efficiency and effectiveness in a call center or in a claims operation, et cetera. So we think people who think broader are going to unlock a lot more value.
There are companies, right? What you tend to see in the media is, so-and-so technology company has stopped hiring in this space because they believe, that's all going to be, replaced with AI. And I think that broader lens that Terry was talking about is incredibly important because there are examples of companies that are saying, hey, we're not going to need this many customer service agents, but you know what? They could actually become our, kind of floor designers and they could work directly with the customers. And so they're kind of completely rethinking how to take areas where they know jobs will be disrupted, not just augmented, and actually take the people that they have that know the company really well and move them into other areas that they need. And I wish we could just make sure that we're hearing more of those stories. The media needs more of those.
One of the phrases I regularly use is, you can't eliminate 5 or 10% of a job. If you have hundreds of people doing exactly the same thing, well, then if you get 5 or 10% productivity, you can eliminate a few heads. 5 to 10% efficiency gains need to be translated into, what's the valuable stuff that you couldn't do because you had no time to do before? So how do you turn, as Ana said, a call center rep into not just servicing, but actually selling or doing, providing a different level of support? And I think that's what the real breakout companies are doing.
So I love this phrase that one of you shared on our briefing call that talked about how AI will allow workers to really, quote, operate and perform at the top of their license. end quote, and transform 10 to 50% of business functions. So how can we encourage folks who may be reticent, particularly women, to adopt AI and really wade through that ambiguity, do the hard thing, and just kind of try?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we talked a little bit about the fear, so I'm not going to go there, first. That is an element of it. I think we're past the initial hype, and I think we have to really focus on the implementation side. And when I look back, it's been almost 2 years since ChatGPT was launched, and at that time, kind of all of the assessments said it was a very, very smart 8-year-old. Now we're getting in the realm of it being an average, maybe a C-level PhD student. But having a co-pilot, not the brand, but an AI that is even a C-level PhD student helping you on anything is a pretty big deal, and I think provides a lot of upside. So I think we have to fundamentally address the concerns and understand that there is still a pretty big gap between, we have 90+% of employees think they need more training, more reskilling, compared to, what executives believe is needed. And I think we have to raise not just the usage, but really the awareness and the comfort levels with the technology. Because if you look by gender, women on average will say that they are less aware in the same company of AI initiatives. They are less aware of changes their company has made. They are less likely to participate in the trainings. And I think there's a little bit of this, kind of yes mindset, which is this is going to be so disruptive that whenever you see anything on AI from your company or somewhere else, just say, yes, I will read this. Yes, I will participate. Yes, I will move on, because the comfort level and how we use it changes the more that we use it. And I think I shared with you, that, it's not just at work, right? Like using it for day to day, you're going to go see a show, right? I'm taking my husband out for a show in a couple of days. And, on the way now, we talk to a GPT about the show. What are we going to see? What should we listen for? How did it do elsewhere? Just if you start using it, whether it's a daily life of cooking or doing things or learning, right? Like deep learning with, let's say you're teaching your kids something, you will translate that a lot more to work as well. Because what I've seen internally is that it's not easy, but it's easier to get to the early adopters that are using it a lot at work. And it's very, very hard with this to convert the next level, not the laggards even, just the middle group of getting to use AI on a day-to-day basis. And you have to get past the 5% or 7% or 8% if you really want to unlock the possibilities.
We're probably at about 20% what I'd call power users. Like they're using the advanced functionality. I will admit, to use the advanced functionality, you got to be interested in finding it because it's a little harder to navigate. But when they do it, they're the ones getting the breakthrough impact. And we've been really pushing to get more adoption. I think we go in surges, but we're now plateauing at about 50% using, quote, sort of regularly. And we need to get kind of beyond that figure in order to get people to do more advanced things. So I would echo what Ana says there. To your comment about what would we say to people out there about be afraid, not be afraid, et cetera. I guess what I would say is the truth of the matter is AI is going to impact your job. So one thing I know for sure is you getting smarter about AI will enable you to use AI to do your job better. Ignoring AI doesn't mean it goes away, right? The people so for instance, there's plenty of things, right, that in the healthcare world that I work in that are very inefficient and that the healthcare workers don't even like to do. They like to treat patients, not transcribe their notes, right? What healthcare people are trying to do is operate at the top of your license. I don't want you transcribing notes. I want that more automated. I don't like the idea of a nurse or a doctor sitting in their pajamas on their couch on Saturday having to write their notes up. That doesn't make them happy. I want them visiting 2 more patients a day because I made that stuff easier. And so if you can kind of approach it from the standpoint of, you know best what about your job adds value and what about your job is monotonous, mundane, repetitive, you can be proactively bringing great ideas, right? And so I think what I like to do is encourage people to, as Ana said, read the emails that come out, join into the Ramesh sessions or the focus groups that go on in your company to try and identify how can we make our jobs more efficient, because the more you lean in, the more you'll actually get what you want out of it.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And I want to stay with you with your operator hat on for a moment. I'm wondering if you can tell us about some of the initiatives that you're actually leading both internally and externally as you do start to train different employee segments. And I'm also wondering if there's any insights you might want to share or other calls to action for them as well.
One of the things that has become clear to me that I think in the beginning, even when I was advising, wasn't as apparent, right? So like the consultants want to focus on what of all the things you could do has, quote, the most impact. It's going to release the most efficiency. It's going to reduce costs the most. It's going to create some breakthrough in your client service model. Those are great and necessary. And we have a number of those we are working on, which I can describe in a moment. What's also become clear to me in the pursuit of active engagement and getting people onto getting them into the on-ramp and onto the highway with you here, like speeding along with AI. What are the things that annoy your people that maybe are not going to transform the business, but for instance, would make people lean in and use it? So one of them that I'm excited about trying to implement at our firm, but I know, for instance, I think this is one of the first things that Mayo Clinic did for its customers, but the analog works for our own company, which is you have websites, you have tons of things you want your customers or your employees to know about. Your HR policy, how many vacation days do I get after this? Which holidays do we have? What benefits do we have with XYZ? I don't think there's a single person listening to this who hasn't struggled to navigate their intranet site that's structured in some way to go find this stuff, right? It's not easy. If you can just put bots on the front that literally enable people to ask basic questions that they otherwise waste time doing, and they can see the power of, holy cow, this thing is really helpful, it gets them used to doing more like prompt engineering and using the tools. So I think you have to think about both breakthrough business impact and things that are broad-based and easy, but that make everyday users' lives easier. And when you do that, you get a little bit more impact and momentum behind what you are doing. One of the ones that I'm most proud of that we have done is related to development, like people development. Consultants do two things, really. We serve clients and help them solve problems, and we are massive talent development machines, okay? Because basically our product is our people. We hire all this raw material out of college and we teach them how to think strategically. We teach them how to solve complex problems faster than our clients might do without us, which is why they're willing to pay us. And as a result of that, the better you can develop your people, like the more momentum you have as a business, okay? Writing reviews is a skill you learn over years, okay? Consultants love serving their clients. They like developing their people. They find writing reviews kind of like the doctor with the notes. They like serving the patient. They don't love writing up the notes, right? So one thing we focused on was, how do we take the thousands and thousands of reviews that have been written over the last decades, some of which are incredibly insightful ways to give people developmental advice and feedback with really good recommendations on how to work on this or how to develop faster. And how do you put those at the fingertips of someone who's only been writing reviews for 2 years? Like, you can see how that's a massive improvement in their ability to coach and advise. And then our next chapter of that is actually going to be taking it a step further, where even for the same skill you're asking someone to develop, we talked with you about this, I think, about like different personality types, whether you do Myers-Briggs or you do the DISC profiles, different people are wired differently personality-wise. And so for the same skill they're trying to develop, if you're an introvert or an extrovert or something, how you will go about it and what's getting in your way is different. So imagine if we could bring that into giving coaching and feedback, because today what happens is most people's coaching and feedback reflects who they are onto whoever they're giving coaching to. It's like generic coaching about it's sort of like, here's how I would work on that. Mm-hmm. Imagine if we could help prompt people to think about who is that person and what makes them different, because we know their profile, and how do you give them much more tailored advice? And so I'm super excited about the advances we can get from some of our investments in talent development and coaching.
Ana, I'd really love to bring you in to talk a little bit more about the pink collar jobs specifically and some opportunities there.
Well, I think the example that Terry gave actually translates really well, right? Because, people, in most pink collar jobs, you are communicating ultimately, with somebody that might or might not be open to hearing what you have to tell them, depending on if the news is good news or bad news. So whether you can meet them where they are, whether you can tell them in a way that they're willing to accept it, is actually pretty critical to their standard of care. And I think that's partially coming back to your point about, how is it that 40% of Gen Z prefer an AI manager? Well, part of the reason is because they have no fear of asking any question to AI. And the way that they ask the question, they know they're not necessarily going to be judged for how they're asking the question or what they're asking about. And also because it's available anytime. So I think thinking about how can we leverage technology to actually not just, increase the care, because we do actually have some supply challenges in pink collar jobs, but also just improve the way care is given. I think is a huge opportunity.
That's really interesting because I think people leaders really need to hear that data point about what Gen Z needs in a leader, but feels they aren't getting and what they feel like they can get from AI. I think this is really the opportunities of, what executive leadership really has to be zeroing in on. There's so much to be done here.
I'm afraid it'll be the next generational divide, though, where we'll have like the boomers and the Gen Xers going, oh my gosh, I can't even believe that. But yes, I would agree. There's something they get when they're talking to, say, the avatar or the bot that they're not getting necessarily from the day-to-day manager.
So I want to thank you both for such a tactical and compelling conversation. There's so much for us to act on today as leaders and at all levels of the organization. For our audience, thank you so much for tuning in today, and we're excited to reconnect with all of you on the next episode of Breaking with Tradition. Take care.
If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen. Watch on YouTube or find us on catalyst.org/podcast.